The dark art of polling and what we can say with any degree of confidence about the presidential race, as well as, of course, the down ballot races that will determine control of the Senate and the House. Let's get right to it with Kyle Kondik. He's managing editor of Larry Sabato's Crystal Ball and University of Virginia Center for Politics Director of Communications. Kyle, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good morning.
So, all right. So, where do you think things stand, and why should we believe you?
Well, I don't know if you should or you shouldn't, but
yeah, right.
Look, I mean, I think the race appears to be very close. I think it does make sense that that's the position we're in. Donald Trump's been on the ballot for this is the third straight time. Obviously, his Democratic opponents have changed, but he's the constant. Trump lost a very close race in 2016, or Trump won a very close race in 2016. He lost a very close race in 2020. You're going to see little changes here and there in terms of how different demographic groups vote and in how different states vote. But I think you'd expect there to be a decent amount of continuity. The difference between 2024 in the polls and 2020 and 2016 is that the polls are generally showing a pretty close race this time. They often didn't in 2016 and 2020, particularly 2020. To me, the polls kind of make sense as to where they're at right now. But we also don't, you don't know in advance what sort of error there's going to be and whether there's an error in favor of one candidate or the other.
This a piece by Nate Cohen at the New York Times about polling methodology is getting a lot of play, a lot of discussion. I wonder if you read that, just talking about weighting in terms of polling and or not doing so, and the idea that it sort of creates two different regimes of polls.
Yeah, I did, and one of the things that he talks about is whether pollsters will to recall the presidential vote in 2020. So, pollsters wait on all sorts of demographics to get to make the sample kind of look like what they expect the electorate to look like. Right. So, if you get too many college-educated respondents, which is a common thing in polling, then you sort of weight down the college-educated respondents and you weight up the non-college-educated respondents. And the same thing would be happening on recalled vote choice. One of the challenges, and Cohen talks about this, and this is something I've just heard for years about recalled vote choice, is that people sometimes don't really remember who they voted for, or there can almost sometimes be a bias toward the person who won. And more people will recall voting for the winner than actually voted for them at the time. I mean, again, for like really plugged in political people, it would be, you'd think it'd be ridiculous to remember who you voted for. But like for a lot of people who aren't really maybe following it as closely or aren't as obsessed with it, maybe they wouldn't recall it correctly. So that's just one of the challenges. Now, he went through whether, you do weight by past vote or you don't weight by past vote. And to me, it didn't really change the outlook of the election all that much. It wasn't like one way of doing it showed, Trump winning and one way showed Harris winning. They both kind of showed a pretty close race.
And is that I mean, like in terms of if you were handicapping, like Polymarket and these betting sites, I mean, who do you think has the advantage right now? If you look at Trump's, numbers in the battleground states, he's, basically Kamala's about where Hillary was in 2016, and we know how that turned out. So he's running well ahead of where he was against Biden 4 years ago and about where he was against Hillary, it seems to me. And so does that mean advantage Trump?
I mean, look, if you just take the polls at face value, you get Harris leading by tiny amounts in the northern battlegrounds, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, again, just by a hair in some of these places, and Harris leading in Nevada. And then you get Trump leading in some of the Sun Belt states, so like Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina. You take it at face value, maybe you give a tiny little edge to Harris, but these leads are so small that I don't think either of them are really ahead. One difference between 2016 and now is that there are just fewer undecideds. The Clinton-Trump race was sort of more fluid in terms of the polling.
Yeah.
You also had a bunch of people saying they were voting third party, and a lot of those people came home. It seems like there was a break toward Trump at the end. There may be a break one way or the other, although there are so few undecideds that that could tip the election, but it's honestly a small number of people as reflected in polls.
Well, I think all eyes will be in Pennsylvania. How much time have you spent there polling?
So look, we don't. I look at a lot of polls. We don't conduct polls really at the Center for Politics. There is I think the balance of the data. Again, you could basically say that it's dead tied. Maybe you'd give a little hair to Harris. But there are a lot of and the other thing about Pennsylvania is that I could imagine Harris winning it but still losing the election. I think if Trump wins Pennsylvania, he's going to win because Harris probably needs all three of those northern battlegrounds. Trump doesn't necessarily need that as so long as he holds up in the Sun Belt.
The underlying numbers though are a bit confusing to me because we see in a lot of the polling Trump doubling right now his percentage of the black vote compared to what he got in 2020. He's doing much better with the Latino vote than he did in 2020. His lead among non-college educated, the so-called working class voters, is bigger than it was certainly bigger than it was against Biden, and that's 60% of the likely voters. So I don't see how he's slightly down.
I think a lot of the stuff that's going on in the crosstabs of these polls is not really believable. I think that I don't. I mean, maybe Trump will improve marginally with black voters. I don't necessarily expect there to be some sort of big shift. I would also say that there are certain aspects of the polls that are probably artificially good for Harris. Like she's sometimes winning like 65 plus voters. I don't necessarily expect that to happen. So, part of what's going on with some of this weighting we talked about is that it can sort of make the internals of the crosstabs of the polls maybe look a little screwy. And that might be what's going on. And again, it maybe benefits Trump with certain subgroups, but it also probably benefits Harris.
And you wrote for over at centerforpolitics.org, your place, about polling error in 2016 to 2020, and you raised Wisconsin in particular. Why?
Yeah, Wisconsin had in terms of being off from the eventual margin, basically a 7-point error in favor of Democrats in both 2016 and 2020. And one of the themes of of this year was the Democrats holding up better in Wisconsin than they were in many other states. And when you think about the polling error from last time, you think, boy, it leads you to question that. Now, I will say that the polls in Wisconsin are basically very close at this point. So I wouldn't expect some sort of big error like that. And some of the Wisconsin pollsters are talking about ways they're trying to basically better capture the kind of white rural vote in that state that tends to be very, very Republican leaning. But yeah, I mean, you look at what happened in 2016 and 2020, and it should give you a little bit of caution about the polls. But back in 2012, Obama was the one who was underestimated in the polls. So these things do change over time in terms of whether there's a consistent polling error one way or the other.
What's your handle for control of the House and Senate?
My guess is that the House would probably break the way of the presidential, although you could imagine sort of a split outcome because both of them are very close and competitive. We've had tiny House majorities the last two elections, 222 seats for the winning side. I could imagine something like that or even closer. I think the Republicans look pretty decent in the Senate. They've got a very good map. They're guaranteed to flip West Virginia. They already had 49 seats going into this election. They're going to win West Virginia. They're favored in Montana. That would be 51 right there, assuming they don't lose any of their current seats. And I think they're still favored in all their current seats. So, there are a number of other close races across the country, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin to some degree. But in terms of actually just getting the majority, Republicans to me have a pretty clear path to at least 51, and that gets them the majority whether they win the presidency or not.
When it comes to like the issue matrix, I mean, as you said, sort of at the outset, I mean, this is a turnout game. You've got to turn your base out, a base plus election, basically. But I'm just wondering, like, for the bread and butter issues of the respective sides with their respective desired constituencies or available constituencies, who has got the advantage there in terms of intensity? Like, is it Trump with the border, for example, maybe the border and inflation, or is it Kamala Harris with abortion and, saving our democracy?
I think different polls sort of tell different stories about this, and sort of overall motivation level of the two parties. As we get more data about like early and absentee voting in certain states, maybe that'll give a little bit of help flesh out maybe what's going on here. The economy / inflation typically ranks as the top issue. Trump generally has an advantage on those kinds of issues, but maybe not quite as strong as they used to be. And there's this interesting dynamic too of there are clearly people out there who have an unfavorable view of Trump but plan to vote for him. But also there are people who retrospectively say that they think Trump did a good job or that they approved of his job performance, but they're not going to vote for him. So his actual range of support is like favorability is the floor and the retroactive approval is the ceiling, and that's like that gets you between like 43% and 51%. I don't know if that tells you all that much, but it is an interesting dynamic of people who maybe don't like Trump but want to vote for him, and they approve of Trump but they don't want to vote for him. It's just an interesting dynamic that we see in a lot of these polls.
Kyle Kondik, managing editor of Sabato's Crystal Ball and University of Virginia Center for Politics, director of communications. Kyle, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Hear about the big stories of the day, then talk about them right here on Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Balance of Nature supplements, changing the world one life at a time.
Oh, I have a friend, Julia, who has